till he died in the 1920s. Another interdisciplinary aspect of this method is the advantage that it offers us a deeper insight into the historical context through the eyes of Misirkov, through the thoughts of him. So contextual biography is the analysis of political thought that opens up a window, or let's say a sonda, into the epoch under scrutiny. This will be especially interesting, as you shall see, when I start speaking about Misirkov's efforts for Macedonian nation building. That is the building of a national feeling, not national chauvinism, not at all, but the formulation, what is the Macedonian nation? At the bottom of my speech, I will try to take you to an intellectual experiment, so bear with me. How do I get back? Here? Oh, no. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Ah. Okay, thank you. I will not delve into the details of Misirkov's biography, but the second part is the main part of my speech, is the reception of Misirkov after April 1991, based on archive material I found at the University of Washington in Seattle. And then my speech shall be concluded with an explanation or a definition about Misirkov's concept of cultural evolution. What did he mean with cultural evolution? 3 dates to those of you who are not very familiar with Misirkov's biography. He was born in 1874 in November in Postol near Enice, Vardar. He went to a Greek school. The next important date is 1893, the foundation of the VMRO, the Inner Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, to which I shall refer for reasons of time as IO, Inner Organization. That means the revolutionary organization in Macedonia, on Macedonian territory. He has very good ties to Russian pan-Slavist circles. He graduated at St. Petersburg University. And after the Ilinden uprising of August, he wrote Za Makedonski Teraboti, which were published in Sofia in December. He died 26 July 1926 of a brain tumor and was buried in Sofia. You can read the details of his biography in my conference paper that is going to be published. Now, the reception of Misirkov after April 91. Was there an anti-Macedonian bias after April 91? There were 2 articles I found which make me believe that there was not a concerted campaign to discredit Macedonia, but it was certainly the beginning. The main rationale was to attack Misirkov to get at the Macedonian attempts not to get involved in the war. Jeremija Mitrovic, a Serb, and Alexander Petkov, a Bulgarian, published so-called scientific articles presenting analysis of alleged new source material, and based on this a critique of Misirkov's character, so a critique ad hominem, and his national allegiance, his national identity as a Macedonian patriot. First, Mitrovic. His article bears the title New Insights into Krste Petkov Misirkov's Biography. Mitrovic calls for a thorough revision and correction of the image of Misirkov as a Macedonian patriot, presenting new documents allegedly found in the Archive Yugoslavia. He does not indicate exactly where he found these new documents. He just writes Archiv Yugoslavia. One has to believe that. These allegedly new documents reveal, so Mitrovic, that Misirkov sought employment as a teacher at Bitola High School in 1922. He was, according to Mitrovic, driven by selfish ambition caused by his fickle national allegiance. To obtain teaching position and personal advancement and a higher salary, of course, Misirkov would have adopted any nationality. Mitrovic's main argument reads that Misirkov pursued no other interest than his personal advancement, for which he switched loyalty, national identity, to whatever states that provided him with a position. I quote, "In order to gain the position of a high school teacher shortly before his death, Misirkov expressed his wish to serve in southern Serbia, Serbie du Sud, how the Serbs referred to Macedonia. When he learned that his application had been rejected, Misirkov contacted the Bulgarians, attempting to prove that he had always been working for them and that he was a little bit more a Macedonian and a little less a Bulgarian. The Macedonians of today, that means in 1991, les Macédoniens de nos jours, are the faithful pupils of their master. You see the rationale and the goal of this article." End of quote. Alexander Petkov article was published a year later, 1992. His article bears the title Krste Petkov Misirkov's Diary. After his brief biographical remarks, neutral in tone, the author presents his translation of Misirkov's memoirs, covering his stay in Bitola. The text dates allegedly from 21st to 31st January 1903, roughly 7 months before the Ilinden uprising. Appointed by the Central Committee of the I.O., Misirkov went to Bitola to organize the preparations for the uprising. Petkov does not reveal where he found the diary, but describes it as a regular note, I quote, as a regular notebook with hardcover measuring 16 to 10 centimeters with 18 numbered pages. End of quote. The original text is written in Russian. The translation is Petkov's. In the first pages of the diary, an obviously depressed Misirkov questions his duty to die for the Macedonian cause, expressing serious doubts about the uprising. He describes his painful life at the school. In the breaks, his colleagues ignore him in the staff room and they do not forward important information about teachers' meetings. Today, we would call such behavior harassment. The reader gets the general impression that Misirkov was a selfish intellectual, full of doubts about the uprising, psychologically unstable, and worst, unpopular among his fellow teachers. Nobody seemed to trust him. The teachers considered his close relationship with the Russian consul Alexander Alexandrovich Rostovsky a further proof of his lack of loyalty to the I.O. They thought that Misirkov was a Russian spy. Petkov's text presents Misirkov in a negative fashion. The diary could be authentic because of the style and wording. It confirms Misirkov's early doubt about the Ilinden uprising. Immediately after its failure, he published a sharp critique in Zamakedonski Teraboti. Comparing the contents and tone of the diary with his main work, Misirkov's political views appear to be consistent. That is, an honest but unpopular analysis of the I.O.'s decision to go for the uprising. Cui bono, we have to ask ourselves all the time when scrutinizing historical texts. The bottom line, in my humble opinion, is these articles, Mitrovic's and Petkov's, are forgeries. We can only really be sure if these texts would undergo forensic tests. How old is the paper? Then textual analysis. From a critical perspective, they mirror the Serb and Bulgarian radical nationalist views in the early 1990s. Their goal of the radicals, I not refer to the Serb nation or the Bulgarian nation, to the radicals in these nations. Their goal was to discredit Misirkov and, through Misirkov, Macedonian politics. Their main target was Macedonia's exit from Yugoslavia. From the Serbian radical point of view, we could say Macedonia is an unreliable entity. It betrayed Yugoslavia, it became disloyal to the Yugoslav state. From a Bulgarian radical nationalist point of view, we could argue that Macedonia has always been a part of Bulgaria. Fifth, to present new historical documents supportive of one's political viewpoint has always been a traditional weapon in conflicts, not only in the Balkans. I remind you here of the protocols of the elders of Zion. Now to Misirkov's political thought. I titled to describe the quintessence of his reflections about the nation, nationhood, and perhaps a state with cultural evolution, not terrorism. We can describe Misirkov's political thought in 4 points, 4 main principles. First, the rejection of IO's Ilinden operation, it was not successful. Second, loyalty to the high port, that is the Ottoman Empire, would protect the Macedonian people, the people living on Macedonian territory, by being assimilated by Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece. The third principle is educate the people, a peaceful cultural evolution, not violence. And the fourth and last principle is to build a federation of the polyethnic population according to the Swiss model. I quote, "More than 5,000 Macedonians hold government posts in Sofia alone, and the number of candidates for the civil service is no less. The majority have held or will hold high functions in the government. Most of these gentlemen think above all of their own interests, to carry out their egotistic designs and land themselves with a cushy job. They are prepared to show themselves greater Bulgarians than the Bulgarians themselves." That is Misirkov's critique of his fellow Macedonians, who lack, according to him, a Macedonian identity, and more importantly, the will to develop a Macedonian identity. In his suggestions of nation building, he made a major philosophical contradiction, a contradictio in adjecto. Let me explain why. To Misirkov, language was the key to the Macedonian question. Codifying the Central Macedonian dialect as the only written language would be a first step to untangling the confusing web of languages, dialects, religious affiliations, foreign influence, and great power decision-making. I quote, "The regeneration in a spiritual and material sense demanded one language." I quote, "Even when not engaged in official work," so Misirkov, "the Macedonian intellectuals should always speak to one another in a Central Macedonian dialect, that of Veleš, Prile, Bitola, and Ohrid. And this language should be introduced as a compulsory subject in all religious and national teaching, even in the Turkish schools. The Central Macedonian dialect should become the literary language of Macedonia." End of quote. But, there is always a but. On the one hand, all citizens, regardless of their faith, language, and ethnic identity, should speak Macedonian in the schools and the churches. The Central Macedonian dialect, of course, Misirkov chose the Central Macedonian dialect out of political reasons. It was not close to Bulgarian, neither close to the Serbian language. The Central Macedonian dialect would create a sense of unity, the sense of being a nation, through the common language. On the other hand, this demand to respect the cultural religious rights was a basic principle of that unity. He was not aware that he had created a contradictio in adjecto. The polyethnic nation should be united by the disciplined and unanimous use of the language of the Slavic majority, and at the same time united in its acknowledgement of the cultural and religious diversity of the citizens. This was a catch-22 situation. If the official language of communication in the schools and the churches had to be the Central Macedonian dialect, how could a minority enjoy the right to use its language? A right that cannot be realized, a language that cannot be spoken, is an empty right. It's hollow, it's only existing on paper. Is there a solution to this catch-22? I fear not. I've been thinking yesterday night about how could he have meant it. I checked back forces. I fear Misirkov was not aware of this catch-22, and there is no way out of this contradictio in adjecto. The most important thing was the cultural evolution. I quote, science and literature are the most important factors in the development of any people. The basic precondition for cultural work is not the full political freedom, but the moral education of the people. The final assessment, my final assessment. Misirkov was an honest patriot supporting the Macedonian cause against the Serb-Bulgarian and Greek assimilation. Second, he was striving for Macedonian independence with peaceful means, in philosophical terms, the rationalism and humanism of the Enlightenment. And third, he was a foresightful intellectual contending democratic self-government in a federation of all Macedonian people. I think Misirkov would have been a good president of Macedonia. Blagodaram. I announced at the beginning of my speech that I would like to take you to an intellectual experiment. So I'm certainly not as arrogant to mingle or meddle myself into Macedonian foreign policy, but I was just thinking about, owing to the central characteristic of Misirkov's political thought, peaceful, non-violent, based on cultural evolution, on education, I think we could think of him as perhaps the founding father, the intellectual founding father of a modern Macedonia, democracy in a republic, cultural evolution. I don't know, it's certainly not an advice to your government, but it seems to me it would perhaps take the edge out of the current very difficult political situation Macedonia finds itself blocked by Greece. This is just a couple of humble thoughts of a neutral Swiss citizen. I thank you very much for your attention.
И благодариме на доктор Баер за незиното излагање. Дали...
Thank you. Do you have any questions? First, the professor, if you allow her. Ms. Baer, Krste Misirkov was a philolog and a scientist. His concept for the basis principles of our literary standard language are on the basis of scientific point of view. They're not political. More broadly seen, they come into the ideas of revival, renaissance, cultural evolution, and so on. And Josette has the same point of view. He sees the world as a place for cultural competition among peoples. His thesis for cultural revolution, in the sense of development of consciousness for nationhood, awareness as a scientist, which means choosing the central dialects, which are the clearest ones, with least neighborhood languages influence, and then from there to spread and to create standard Macedonian language. That's my specification, that's my expertise. With this seen from this point of view, this is what our linguists look at it.
Thank you very much for your explanations. I'm not a linguist, I'm a political scientist. I look at things in a political way. I think I absolutely agree with you that the Central Macedonian dialect is, as far as I understand it, the purest form of the Macedonian language. But I think that by choosing this central dialect, I'm convinced that Misirkov was led by political reasoning, which I explained. But I thank you.
I would like to bring to your attention, I never ever have heard Slovenians, Croatians, Serbians to say they speak Slavic language. But we've got now, Macedonians speak Slavic language. How you come to this? Thank you.
I studied Slavonic philology. I can read Macedonian. It is what I learned at universities, that Macedonian is a Slavic language. What else would it be? What would you say what it is? Or then I didn't get a question, sorry.
I think, if I'm understanding, I think what he wants to say is that when someone says I'm Croatian, you speak Croatian. When someone says you're Serbian, you speak Serbian. When somebody says you're Macedonian, do you speak Greek or do you speak the Slavic style? So why can't it just be Macedonian? Why does it have to have that adjective to it? Oh, go ahead. May I? I think I'm going to go on English. I think what our guest was asking was Croatians, Serbians, Slovenians never have to add an adjective to their language. They never have to add that extra qualifier of identifying that, oh yeah, I speak Slavic Croatian, or I speak Slavic Serbian. Whereas when you say to someone that you're Macedonian, they'll ask you, oh, are you Greek, or do you speak Greek? And you say, no, I'm from Macedonia. Oh, you're the Slavic kind. I think that's what you were getting at. Why can't it just be Macedonian without a qualifier, without an adjective, like Croatian, like Serbian, like Slovenian, like Greek, right? No adjectives. I think that's what he was getting at.
Okay, now I've understood. The difficulty in Macedonia is that you have Greek, the Greek language, and you have the Slavic language. So you cannot just refer, you have to be precise. When you refer to a Macedonian language, you need to add this qualifier, Slavic, to make yourself perfectly understood. Otherwise, it creates just a lot of confusion, because the Greek would... Macedonian is not a Greek language. No. The Greek refer to themselves as to their language as Greek. But it should be as precise as much, especially in this region, in this territory, where you have so many groups, so many languages and minorities. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you. Dr. Guševska?
Благодарам. Значи, како лингвисти, аз пред се македонист.
As a linguist, as a Macedonian language linguist, a kind of a clarification of why Misirkov chooses the central dialects. This is something that dates from the 40s or the 50s years of the 20th century, stipulating that the official language should contain its central dialects. So there are internal and external factors of why the central dialects are the ones that are chosen. One was said by Mrs. Kepovska, and that is because he took up the lingual parameters, because he was the top linguist. he was a top-notch scientist when it comes to linguistics and so on. He collaborated with the top Russian linguists and so on. So he took the linguistic factors, that is the central Macedonian area, that is, of course, equally distant from all the other dialects, but similarly, the central Macedonian speeches, so the dialects of Bitol, of Prilep, of Veles, are taken as a reference because those cities were the cultural, the trade, the economic, the political centers as well in the Macedonian history. So that's the external lingual factor, because that's a combination of one and the other, and that is actually the baseline of any codification. If you take a look at the theory of codification of any language, you would see the two aspects that are being considered as important ones. So the prestigious dialects, the city dialects, in the specific case, those will be the central dialects of Republic of Macedonia, so kind of a clarification.
Explanation. Now I know a little bit more about linguistics. Thank you.
И благодарам на доктор Баер. Го најавувам следниот.
Thanks to Dr. Baer.